Okay, so I have my cool UFO guy or gal, and I want to animate him. So we're going to introduce a couple new windows to deal with animation. You should, by default, at the bottom of your screen, see this timeline. And we went over this a little bit whenever we were dealing with cloth last class. And this is your timeline window. So you'll see at the very bottom of the screen, maybe you have to move your window in on your Mac to see it, but just beneath where the timeline is, there's like some shortcuts where there's like some hints. And these are contextual to any window that you hover your mouse on. It tells you how to use the mouse to navigate that window. So if I have my mouse here in the 3D viewport, you see down here it says select or deselect all, left click is box select, and middle click is rotate view. And all of that is true. And if I move my mouse into the timeline, you'll see left click is to select keyframes. We don't have any keyframes right now, so we're not really going to do that. Left click and drag is what this icon means, would be to move those keyframes around. If I do middle mouse button, it changes or pans my view of my timeline. And if I hit right click or right click and drag, it moves our timeline marker. So right now I'm going to move to 1, the first frame in our scene. And Blender, by default, displays time in frames. So each frame is 1 step in time. And so our default time here is that if you see right here in our timeline window, it says we start at 1 and our scene ends at 250. So we have 250 steps to tell a story right now. If you want to think about this in terms of seconds, most video that you see broadcast or online runs at 30 frames a second. So if we wanted to do the math here, we divide 250 by 30, that's 8 essentially seconds. That'd be 8 and change seconds in our scene. There's different frame rates for different videos you can make. Sometimes film runs at 24 frames a second. Like classic film, you see 8mm or I don't know, most movies honestly run at 24 frames a second. That's just the fewest amount of frames you can show in a second that the human eye can sort of register as moving and seamless. And you see fancy TVs now run at 60 frames a second. That's super high def. It's when it looks hyper real. You see a 4K 60 frames a second movie on one of those screens. It looks different than if you saw it in the theater. It looks super fluid. And that's because it's crunching 60 frames into 1 second. I think the default in Blender is 25 frames a second. But anyways, just a little background on how frames work and how that pertains to our scene right here. So I'm going to move my cursor to frame 1. And I want to make a keyframe for my UFO. I want to say at this point in time, this UFO is going to be at this place in space. So what I can do is I can select my UFO and I can right click on them, and there's an option that says insert keyframe. And it gives you the shortcut for that option too, which is just the letter I on your keyboard. So I'm going to go insert keyframe, and you get a lot of options here. I don't use anything beneath rot scale, which is just a shorthand for rotation and scale. I don't use any of these ever. I use location, rotation, and scaling. And then you have different combinations of those 3 beneath it, which would be location and rotation, all 3 of those combined, and then location, scale, yada, yada. So I just want to choose location. And, yeah, location. And once I did that, you'll notice in our timeline down here, we have these little diamonds that showed up. And these are our keyframes. And to the left of those diamonds, there's a little arrow thing. I don't know why they hide this, but there's like a little arrow, and if I hover my mouse over it and click, it brings up a little context menu, which gives a summary of what those keyframes are. So right now we have our cube, which is our UFO, and maybe I'll rename that UFO. So now we have our UFO. We have a set of actions for that UFO, which are object transforms, which is X location, Y location, and Z location. And we're telling Blender at the first frame in our animation, it is at this place in XYZ location. So I'm going to hold right click and drag, and I'm going to move our timeline to like 60, which would be about 2 seconds.
From where, Professor?
Excuse me?
From where? Wait.
So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, it's fine. So first you want to add, like select your object. Has everyone added a keyframe at this point?
I added keyframe.
Okay. So select your object, right click, insert keyframe, and choose location. And wherever you are in that timeline is where you're going to add that keyframe. So I added my keyframes at frame 1.
Yeah.
Whoops. So now I'm going to go forward in time to frame 60, and I'm going to make a change to my UFO. And I'm going to move him. And I have a bunch of other things on my UFO that are not going to move with him because they're different objects right now. I'm going to solve that later. But I'm going to move my UFO over here. So I made a change to its location. I'm at a different point in time. And now I'm going to insert a keyframe. I'm going to right click on it, say insert keyframe, location. And now if I move my timeline to frame 1 and then hit play on our little buttons over here, we can see that Blender moves the UFO from its origin point at frame 1 to wherever else I moved it and made a keyframe. Maybe I want to have, instead of this UFO fly away, I want it to come from outside of the scene and then come in. I can move these keyframes to a different point in time. So this set of keyframes right here is for this location over here in the scene. So if I left click and drag on that top diamond, I can change it so that those keyframes exist later in the scene. And I'm going to do the same for the first set. And I'm just going to like move these over because I want to have another action happen before them. So I'm going to go to the beginning again. And I want to have my UFO maybe start like off screen. So I'm going to move him over here. Maybe it'll be behind this like weird rocky thing. And I'm going to right click on him, insert keyframe, and location. Interesting. Why is it doing that? It's moving on a nice arc. I have no idea why. It should just go from there to there, but it's not doing that. But, so I'm having it come from like off screen behind this like weird pile and then coming to where those eyeballs are. And I want it to maybe stay in place for a second once it gets to this point here. So I'm going to choose that set of keyframes for this position here, and I'm going to duplicate them. And to duplicate these, I can go to marker. No, that's not it. I think you just have to use a shortcut, which is Shift D. Shift D will duplicate those objects. You could also do Control C to copy and then move somewhere in the timeline and Control V to paste. Maybe that makes more sense. I'll look at something real quick. What is I put that? Anyways. So now we have our guy moving from our screen, going to that point, and then leaving. Maybe I need to make some adjustments here. So another way to add keyframes, there's this nifty feature in Blender called automatic keyframe insertion. And if you look in your timeline, it's this button here that looks like the record button. If you have this turned on, and if you click on it and it turns blue, that means it's on. If you have that turned on, if you make any changes to the scene, like move anything around, it'll automatically insert a keyframe at that point. So if you notice, I have my UFO selected, and when I hit play, it looks like it's still like moving through this pile of junk. So what I want to do is like maybe have it move around it. So like at that point where it's kind of clipping it, I'm going to I turned on automatic keyframe insertion, and if I move my UFO to the place I want it to be at, it automatically adds and updates the keyframes at that point in time. So now it moves around that pile of junk. And again, when you have this record button on, any object you move or make any changes, a keyframe is going to pop up. So if you don't want to make any changes to your scene at that moment, make sure you turn this off. But this is like, you know, the most seamless, easiest way to add a keyframe to the scene. It's much easier. I had to show you the hard way first, but like just to like have it like sort of like click as to why, I don't know. That's just why I did it. I don't know why I did that. Cool. So does everyone have a keyframe? Has anyone not been able to add a keyframe to their scene?
Yeah.
Cool. So we have this guy moving, stops, and then goes. So when I made my UFO, I had added these other objects. I added like a lamp to it, and I added these eyeballs. Oops. And so I want to have these eyeballs move with the UFO, and I want to have this like spotlight also travel with this UFO. So right now my UFO is like in the right spot where these things sync up. So what I can do to combine these eyeballs with this UFO body is I can select them, and I have different parts to my eyeballs. I can select my eyes and then select my UFO body, and I could join them if I wanted to. There's a couple ways to like sort of pair up objects. You can either join them, which makes them the same exact object. So if I hit join, and I hit tab, you'll notice that the same object, when I go into edit mode, they are all the same. Like, I don't know. It's just one object. It's just like a hard sort of like combination of all that data. Another way I can, one second, join. Another way I could have these eyeballs follow this object is to have them be parented to this UFO. And that's a new term. So parenting is like, sort of like a way to create hierarchy with objects and say like, this cube here and this cube here, this cube will always follow the other one. It'll make more sense once I start to do it. So if you look at my eyeball, it's made of like a couple different objects. And I want this pupil here, this black part, to always follow the base of the eye. Right now, they're two different objects. So I want this pupil to be parented to this circular eye part. So what I would do is I would select my eyeball and then select the object that would be the parent, or like the boss in the situation. And then I would hit right-click, parent, object, and then set parent to object. It asks you again for some reason. So now if I move my eye part, that pupil is now following it around. So again, I can do this to the other eye. And now they are still separate objects, you see. And if I wanted to make some changes to my, this part of the eye, maybe animate it and make it look around, I can still do that because they're not the same object. They're separate objects, it's just one is told to follow the other one. And we call that parenting. I'm going to do that to my other eye. So I'm going to select the black part and then choose the white part, which is going to be the parent, like the boss of that other object. And now I'm going to use the shortcut, which is Control P. And I want to set that parent to that object. Let me make a thing in the notes here. I forgot I was going to do this. Okay. Parenting. Control P. Right click. Make parent. I'll add some context to that later. So yeah, I made that part of the eye, or I made it is now this this sphere is now the parent of this part of the eye. So now I want to take these eyes and I want these eyes to follow the UFO body. So I'm going to hit select those eyes, and then I'm going to select the UFO body, right click, parent to object, and then I'm going to choose object again. So now, whoops, and I had automatic keyframe insertion turned on, so I added some keyframes I didn't want. So now when I go through the scene, they are now following the UFO around. I want to do the same thing for my beam of light. So with that UFO in the right position, and I'm going to turn off automatic keyframe insertions, I'm going to choose that spotlight, then hold Shift, select my UFO, right-click, parent object, set parent to object. So now that UFO or that beam of light is following the UFO. I realize you don't have a lot of, maybe you added a spotlight to your UFO and was able to parent to that. I didn't expect you to make eyeballs and all that. But yeah. So I'm going to set up my scene a little bit. I haven't looked inside my camera view for a while. I'm going to hit 0 on the number pad and see where my camera is set up. And that is not where I want my camera to be. So I just hit N on the keyboard to bring up this little side window. You can also just sort of click on this nearly invisible arrow on the side of the screen. And I'm going to go to lock camera to view. Did you guys go over this yet? With Jeremy?
The camera?
Lock camera to view?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm going to turn that on so I can make it a little easier to position my camera how I want it. That looks pretty good. I'm going to toggle this off real quick so I don't change it. I'm going to move this block closer to the scene. Now I'm going to play and be like, oh yeah, that looks great. Wait, something got messed up. No, it's fine. Oh, it's just kind of blurry. All right. All right. I save my file. So you can animate, you can add keyframes to a lot of different features in Blender. So I have this spotlight in the scene, but maybe I want it to like sort of turn on at a certain time, like it's just like decided to switch on and like pick something up. So I can add a keyframe to this lamp. So if I select this lamp, this spotlight, in our options over here, again, when you select a lamp, you'll have this little light bulb tab that pops up in the properties window. And I'm going to select that. And again, energy controls the brightness of that lamp. So I'm going to find the point in time where, oh, maybe I want to change my camera actually, because that's where he stops. Let's do something like this. Let's get some real like extreme angles here. There we go. Comes to the scene. So I want to be like, I want him to show up and then like the tractor beam to go like boom, and then for him to fly away. So I'm just gonna like scrub through the timeline. And again, I just went to the timeline window at the bottom and I'm just holding right click and it lets me just sort of scrub through the scene, through time. And I'm gonna find the point where he stops. And I'm going to right click on my energy here. Again, energy over here in the materials or like the lamp settings here. I have my spotlight selected. I want to animate the amount of energy that's going to happen. That's going to allow us to turn on the light. So I want it to turn on like right here. So I'm going to right click on that energy and say insert keyframe. So I know it wants to be bright at this point in time. And then I'm going to move a little bit before that, maybe like, and you can hit left and right on the arrows on your keyboard to just sort of go frame by frame. And then I'm going to change that value to 0. And then I'm going to right click. I'm going to insert a keyframe. So now you see down in the timeline, we have a keyframe where it starts at 0, it's off, and then 5 frames later, it's on and it's bright and it's beaming. So now I'm going to click on this like last track button, hit play. Boom. Now we animated the light. You know what else we could do is we can animate our camera. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to like turn on lock camera to view, and I'm going to turn on this record button for automatic keyframe insertion. And I'm going to switch my point of view. We'll say at the beginning of the scene, the camera is going to be over here. And then I'm going to scrub through in time to where that UFO stops. And then I'm going to change my perspective. And you'll notice I went forward in time, and because I have this record button on, as I'm making changes to my camera, it is adding keyframes. That looks good. So I'm going to turn off my, I'm good with those keyframes. I'm going to turn this off so I don't accidentally make any keyframes. I only turn this on when I know I want to add keyframes to the scene. Once I'm done, I turn it off so it doesn't so I don't accidentally mess something up. So now if I go to the beginning of the scene, I hit play. Got some cool camera work. Maybe I want this UFO to like tractor beam pick up something. I'm gonna make, whoops, I'm gonna turn off lock camera to view. Let's put something in the scene that he's gonna pick up. I'm gonna add, let's see, maybe just Suzanne, just because. Why not? I'm gonna turn her around so she's facing the camera. I'm gonna move her up. Rotate the head back like that, and then maybe scale down to like there. I think my tractor beam is gonna like shrink this head also. See how that looks. I'm gonna scrub through time and see if this lines up right. Yeah. In the beam. Maybe I'll make a little tweak. And I'll add a material to Suzanne here. Call her Susie. Susie will be red. And Susie will be smooth. And I'm going to add a subdivision surface to Suzanne here. And you'll notice Suzanne gets smooth as hell. That's shade smooth. Okay. So now we have this poor monkey in the scene that is about to get abducted by this cool alien. So we're going to add some keyframes to our friend here. So we know we want this head to like shrink inside the UFO, and we want this head to move up inside this UFO. So I'm going to turn on automatic keyframe insertions. I want it kind of goes quick, but we'll say like once that beam of light looks kind of bright, then at that point I want this head to start shrinking. So first I have to give it a set of keyframes for where it exists already. And to do that, I'm just going to right click and do it that way. I'm going to say right click, insert keyframe, and I'm going to say location and scale, because I know it's going to move up, and I know when it moves up, it's going to shrink. And then I'm going to move forward a little bit in time. And we can adjust the timing of these keyframes later. Once you get them down, you can always tweak them, change the speed of them. So I moved forward like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames. That'll be pretty quick. And then I'm going to move this guy up. Shrink. Oh, whoops. I forgot to turn on automatic keyframe insertion. That record button. I'm going to move it up. Now when I move it up, you see it just added keyframes. With scale. And I'm going to move. I'm going to go into wireframe maybe. Yeah, I'm going to go into wireframe so I can see a little bit more clear. And I'm going to move. And I'm going to hit 7 to look from above to kind of get this head to be center inside of the UFO. Once it's out of view, it doesn't really matter. You know? And let's see what happens here. Whoop. So, we got our head shrinking and levitating up inside the UFO. But now when the UFO moves, we want our friend to move as well. And so we want to time this right with the UFO so that they both move at the same time. And I'm going to look at a different window to help me see what's going on in my scene. So we've been just working with the timeline. And I'm going to add another window. I'm going to shrink this one down a little bit. I don't want to move it, or I don't want it to disappear. I'm going to collapse this little summary here, because I want to have this like automatic keyframe insertion button still in my window, in my Blender's like user interface. And I'm going to create another window to use. So if you want to create another window in Blender, if you hover your mouse towards the corner of any of your windows here, you'll notice that your mouse turns into like a plus sign. That means that if you click here, you can create a new window. So I'm going to left click, I'm going to drag up. And I just created another 3D viewport. But I don't want another 3D viewport. I want what I'm going to call, what is called the dope sheet. I don't know why it's called the dope sheet. And the dope sheet is very similar to the timeline. You know, we see frames, we see keyframes in the scene, but the dope sheet is a way to see all the keyframes in your scene. And so if you see here, we have our camera, and I'm going to sort of like minimize some of these. We have our UFO, Suzanne, spotlight, and the camera. Those are the 4 objects in our scene that have keyframes. And we can see where those are. Oops, I moved one. We can see our UFO starts behind the rock, moves a little bit out the side of it, goes above the monkey, pauses, then moves away. We have our 2 sets of Suzanne frames for her initial position and then shrinking and levitating. We can see our 2 keyframes for turning on our spotlight here. And then we can see where our keyframes are for our camera. So we wanted to have Suzanne move with our UFO. So I'm going to go to, and I can scroll in with my mouse wheel to kind of zoom into the scene. And, whoops, I see we have our UFO here. That's at the bottom here. And we see this keyframe. Right here is where it stops resting and begins to move. So I want to go to that point in time, and then I'm going to choose Suzanne. And it looks like that last frame where she's like inside and scaled down is a little off from where our UFO starts to move. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that last frame for where Suzanne moves up, which is this one right here. You see here it says Suzanne on the left. And if you follow that over, we have 2 sets, one where she's on the ground and one where she's up and inside the UFO. And I'm going to left click and drag until I can move this over, until that is right above where our UFO starts to move, so that those 2 actions are now synced up in time. And now I'm going to go to where that UFO ended up. And I'm going to turn on automatic keyframe insertions, and I'm going to move Suzanne over to the same relative position that she was in the UFO prior. Good. That looks pretty good. And I know I just moved that UFO on the x-axis, so it's pretty easy to link up. So now I'm going to turn off my record button because I'm done adding keyframes for now. And I'm going to look how this scene pans out. So we have 250 frames in our scene here, but mine ended a little bit sooner. And, you know, when you're making GIFs, like, a general GIF is like 3 seconds, you know? Sometimes less than that. It's just like strobing impact font. That's all you're staring at. Right now, our scene by default is set to 250 frames. Starts at 1, ends at 250. My animation ends like around 160 is when nothing is happening anymore and the UFO has left the scene. So I'm going to change that end for our timeline to 160. Cool. So maybe I'm going to just go around and check in with everyone. I'm going to stop this recording. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we need to cover here. Picked up project. Yeah, looks good. Anything else I should move around that you want to see me do in this scene? Question.
Can you make Suzanne follow you away from the inside the UFO? Or is it already done?
So right now, Suzanne goes up inside, and she follows a UFO inside.
Yeah, can you show us how?
You want to see how to do that again? Yeah, totally. So what I did, let me start to where I'm going to clear her keyframes and start over with that. So right now I'm starting with like no keyframes on Suzanne. Oh, what? Clear keyframes. What is that sound?
What is that sound?
It sounds like a puppy dog.
Like a dog.
Yeah, that's weird.
I know.
At least someone else heard it. So we want to make Suzanne follow this guy. Oh, maybe I'll leave the. Oh my God. All right, so Suzanne is going to go inside and then follow this dude. So UFO shows up. Rendered. Once the beam turns on, I'm going to turn on automatic keyframe insertion. And right now I have this like multi-tool selected, which is transform. So it has like the user interface for like moving, rotation, and scale in the same tool. So I know, so this is like the first keyframe I want to add is like her position at rest, where she begins in the scene. So I'm going to right click, insert keyframe, and I'm going to say, I'll say location, rotation, scale. I'll say add keyframes for pretty much everything, just so I'm covered. So now, we have our first keyframe for where Suzanne begins. I'm going to move forward like 5 frames. And now I turned on automatic keyframe insertion. I'm going to move Suzanne up inside UFO, and then I'm going to scale her. What? Oh. I don't like that tool, actually. I'm going to scale her down until she's tiny and now within that UFO. So now we have, what's up with that? Her at rest, and then moving up. So now the UFO is moving, and I want Suzanne to move with the UFO. So if you look at the dope sheet, remember I added this other window called the dope sheet. I can see where all the keyframes in my scene are laid out, and I see my UFO has a keyframe right here at frame 124. And that's when this UFO is at this point and is about to move away. So I want to add, or maybe I want to sync up Suzanne's motion with this UFO's motion. So if you see Suzanne's keyframes here, this one is where she's on the ground. This second one is where she's shrunk and up inside that object. And I'm just going to like left click and drag and move her keyframes so when she is up inside that UFO is when that UFO is going to start moving and go away. So now I'm going to move forward in time, and I'm going to look in my scene. I want to find where that UFO ends up. So if I look at my UFO keyframes, I can see a keyframe way over here. It's at frame 182. I'm going to right click and drag and move my timeline scrubber until I get to 182. And at that point is where I want Suzanne to be at the same point as the UFO. I'm syncing up both those actions so that when they move together at the same speed. So now I'm at the right point in time where there's a keyframe for my UFO. I'm going to select Suzanne, who is very tiny at this point, and I have automatic keyframe still turned on, and I'm going to move her towards my UFO until she is, I just hit 7 to look from above, until she is inside him at the same general location. I'm going to turn off automatic keyframe insertion. And now, when I hit play, you can see what happens. Another way I could go about doing this, instead of having to like move Suzanne to like perfectly sync up with this UFO, once she's like inside that UFO and is like docked with the spaceship, she's no longer visible.
Yes, disappear.
Just make her disappear. Like, because, you know, there's no point in even having this object in the scene. So what I could do is, I'm going to look at Suzanne's keyframes. I'm going to delete that last one where she like moves with the UFO. I'm just going to select it. I'm going to hit X and then delete that keyframe. So now she's goes up there, and I'm just going to choose the next couple frames, or just like the next exact frame after the last one. So she starts here. Here's one keyframe. Here's the next keyframe, her inside. I'm going to go one keyframe over. I'm going to turn on automatic keyframe selection, and I'm just going to get her the hell out of there, way far away. Added a keyframe, and now she's just like gone, and we don't have to worry about it.
Yay.
Yeah, easier, right? Cool. I'm going to stop the recording here, and then maybe the last 15 minutes